Hello Mzansi, you're listening to Farmers Inside Track, proudly brought to you by Food for Mzansi. Officially, this is the world's best podcast for 2024 as awarded by WAN-EFRA, the global organization for the world's press. I am your host, Patricia Tembo. Welcome to episode 497. Today we're unpacking legal implications of the bud rot outbreak and how you can navigate compliance requirements in your papaya orchard. This episode is set to be informative and practical as we welcome Lucinda Rhoodie, a director in dispute resolution practice for agriculture, aquaculture, and fishing at Cliff Decker Hofmeyer. Lucinda Rhoodie, welcome to Food for Mzansi's podcast, The Farmers Inside Track. For our listeners, Lucinda Rhoodie is the director in dispute resolution at Cliff Decker Hofmeyer. She is an attorney and will unpack the legal and trade implications of bud rot in South Africa's papaya industry.
Hello, Patricia, and hello also to your listeners.
So for context, the Department of Land Reform and Rural Development recently issued an alert following the detection of the spread of bud rot of palms, specifically in the Limpopo Mopani district and Mpumalanga's Ehlanzeni district municipality. So with the phytosanitary measures now in place, there is a restriction of movement of host materials. So your farmers are navigating a complex landscape of legal and trade implications. So this is where Lucinda will come in to unpack the legal and trade implications and provide clarity to this issue. So Lucinda, will you please take us through the legal risks associated with the spread of bud rot?
Patricia, I think one must keep in mind that the sale, import and export of agricultural products, of which papaya is of course one, are heavily legislated. For instance, by way of the Plant Improvement Act, the Agricultural Pest Act, just to name a few. So farmers who operate in this industry now faces a legal as well as regulatory risk amidst this spread of bud rot. So I think we can chat first about the regulatory risk that is being presented to your farmers. So as you are aware, not only does farmer needs these, and you just mentioned it now, phytosanitary import products and certificates. So I think from a regulatory perspective, the farmers must be cognizant of their permits, which they currently have to export their fruit, as well as move around fruits locally to make sure that no action which they take, as well as no omissions on their part in regard to the disclosure of bud rot, the treatment of bud rot, the further prevention of bud rot, contravene any of their permit conditions, any legislation or any regulations thereunder. Because what farmers need to take account of and be very, very aware of is that contravention of the relevant legislation, for instance, the failure to disclose the existence of bud rot to the Department of Agriculture, could lead to fines, could lead to penalties, and in certain instances, it can also lead to imprisonment. Not sure that it will ever happen, but I mean, that is a risk that is presented as a result of a contravention of legislation. So that deals with a regulatory risk.
And maybe if you could speak more to neighboring farms, if neighboring farms suffer losses due to contamination, what legal claims could arise and how can farmers protect themselves?
There's two angles, two possibilities, areas of risk where farmers can be faced with civil liability claims. The first is, as you say, where a farmer fails to adhere to the legislative requirements. If the department, as you have said, have already instituted some regulations and some constrictions on the movement of plants, if they don't adhere to those risks, and that causes the spread of bud rot to neighboring farmers, the, let's call it defaulting farmer, can be accused of negligence and can then, by way of what we call a delictual remedy, in other words, there's no contractual relationship between farmer one and farmer two. On a delictual basis, the defaulting farmer could then be held liable for damages suffered by a neighboring farmer if the defaulting farmer was negligent and owed a legal duty, which I think would be able to be made out here towards his neighboring farmer. The other area of possible civil liability is one must remember that farmers in South Africa aren't only importers and exporters of fruit. They are also sellers of fruit locally to retailers, to farmers markets, and to individuals. That is governed by a contractual relationship. And if a farmer firstly fails to disclose the existence of bud rot in his or her produce and sells that on to retailers, that constitutes a misrepresentation, which will allow and afford the retailers a legal basis on which to claim damages from the farmer in such instance. But furthermore, if there is a contract in place and the farmer fails to disclose or sells what we generally know as a defective product to its purchasers, that can lead to cancellation by these purchasers of very lucrative contracts for the farmers. The contracts may have penalty clauses in it, which can lead to penalties being levied against the farmers and, of course, damages. And sometimes farmers, they have this nice farm stall on their farm next to the road where they sell to individuals. And if they sell produce which is infected with bud rot, that could potentially lead to contraventions of the Consumer Protection Act, because your individuals are protected by the Consumer Protection Act, which can in turn lead to complaints against the farmer at the Consumer Commission. So there are various potential legal risks from a civil perspective that farmers face in this regard.
And it does sound like contractual relationships between farmers play a very important role. And, I'm thinking it's something we'd probably need to unpack at a future episode with farmers. With key export markets enforcing strict regulations on plant health, what could this outbreak mean for South Africa's ability to trade internationally?
So the South African government correctly complied with its obligations as a member of the International Plant Protection Convention by disclosing the existence of bud rot. And we've already seen the first implications of that. Both Botswana and Namibia has temporarily suspended imports to South Africa. So from a larger South African economic perspective, that's very negative. Not only from the farmers, the exporters' perspective, but also from the economy. There's not that inflow of income into the South African economy, which of course dribbles down to the man in the street. From the farmer's perspective, as we said earlier, a farmer must apply for a phytosanitary permit in order to export products. And the importing countries have their own requirements. And it is possible that countries who have decided not to suspend imports from South Africa may just up and tighten their import conditions, which may have a financial impact on the individual farmer. There may be new requirements, extra lab testing, extra treatment of fruits, which can up the costs, the production costs of a farmer, which can trickle down to the consumer in the street, who is now going to pay more for fruit. The contrary to that is because there might be, and I think there will be, at least for the foreseeable future, less exports to other countries. There may be an excess availability and supply of papayas, for instance, in South Africa. That may drive the price down because of the oversupply, and the farmers are going to struggle financially. So farmers must just keep in mind that they must practice effective cultural control and really try to root out this problem as soon as possible.
Thank you so much to Lucinda Rhoodie, a director in dispute resolution practice for agriculture, aquaculture, and fishing at Cliff Decker Hofmeyer. For more information on this topic, you can visit www.foodformzansi.co.za. And that brings us to the end of this episode. Remember to subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform. From me, Patricia Tembo, Our technical producer, Megan van der Vent, and the rest of #Team Food for Mzansi, thank you for listening.